What's up, Team Tobias? What's up, Austin, Texas? Lane Haymont here on the Literary Lens with Ann Rose, Kelly Dyksterhouse, and special guest Natasha Morris. Natasha, why don't you tell us about yourself? Because our listeners, all three of them, have never met you.
Well, I'm the Kidlit agent over here, the senior agent in Kidlit. And I usually don't come on the podcast because I feel like I never have anything to contribute to the conversation. And yet today's conversation is all about like the difference of YA versus new adult. And Anne and I are going to like butt heads on things, but it's one that is, I think, very an emerging conversation of what that all looks like. Well, I guess before we start off, I've been making these graphics, as you probably have seen on social media, that's like, hey, how do I as an agent determine what's YA, what's middle grade, what's picture book? So I guess I should read you which one is the YA one, and then I'll read the new adult one, and we can get into that. So my YA, if something is YA, if characters are dealing with first love, sexuality, figuring out what they want to do with their lives, how to interact with the world as they're growing out of childhood, how to separate themselves from family dynamics that they now have some ability to make a decision about. Young adult. We all kind of feel like that's young adult. Yeah. So new adult. If characters are dealing with first jobs, first bills, first crises, the hashtag no one really prepared them for this, challenging their childhood belief systems, figuring out what they want to do with their lives, how to interact with the world and family now that they are independent. And that's what I am starting to think of, like, that's new adult. So what do y'all think?
I'm going to hop in because doesn't new adult, I'm saying this as an outsider and maybe to stir up controversy, because doesn't new adult have to take place on a college campus or in college?
I mean, it can, but I'm gonna my brain is a squirrel, and y'all know this very well. I think that it is like the thing, like all motorcycles are bicycles, but not all bicycles are motorcycles. And so I think all new adult books can take place on college campuses, but not all college campus books will be new adults, because you can be in a freshman situation where you're 18 and you've moved across the country, you're going to a new school, and you're like, whoa, who am I now? But then like a 22-year-old who is on a college campus and is like, wait a second, I'm leaving the structure of education, and what is that going to look like? And not all kids go from high school into college. Sometimes they run away with the Ren Fair. That is what I wish I had done, but they do other things. And so I think new adult is opening to looking at that, like, hey, there's now like 3 of us living in a house together, and our parents aren't there making food. And we don't have curfews. What does this now look like? This new world order look like?
Sounds like a frat house.
I mean, it does sound like a frat house, but it doesn't necessarily have to be at a college frat.
Okay, so what about the, at least when new adult first came out, it all had to be super spicy. Do you think that's a characteristic of new adult now? When people first started talking new adult.
Yeah, I think it was originally, and I think it still is, because if you think about the new adult books that a lot of people are modeling after, it's Fourth Wing, ACOTAR, assistant to the villain kind of books. And they tend right now to be more fantasy, but I think if we're going to think about new adult as a category, the same way we do with Kidlit is a category, not a genre, then I think we need to think about, like, okay, can there be a new adult coming of age book? Can there be a new adult, romance? Like, can it be outside of that? And I think spicy, sexy times, you don't necessarily have to have spicy, sexy times to really engage with what a theme, with the themes, because, some of the most new adult things that can happen to you is like, okay, you are trying to find a new apartment in a new city, and your budget is this, and you find out that you are going to have rats in that apartment because that's all you can afford.
Okay, so does that mean there could be, say, a new adult horror? Is new adult, or because you always say category versus genre. Mm-hmm. So if I have a new adult horror, does it get stocked on the horror shelf, or does it get stocked? Because new adult usually gets stocked on YA, doesn't it? And
Well,
Anne's pointing at me.
That's what Anne and I have
the thing that I have the biggest thing about. Like I think it's great. I think we need new adult books. I don't disagree with anything Natasha is saying about themes and all of these things, right? But I think the problem is that we have to have the buy-in from the bookstore on where these books are going to be shelved in order for this category to be successful. So I think that is the biggest stumbling block here. So yeah, publishers now are coming out like we want these new adult books, but how are they selling them? Because the publisher's customer is the bookstore, and if the bookstore doesn't have a shelf to put the books, they're not going to be able to sell them the book.
Well,
so
and I'm going to jump off of
problem with new adult.
And I'm going to jump off of Anne's point because it's a very valid point, and take it one step farther to say that the way that publishing refers to categories is not how most people will refer to it. So when you say young adult, to most people outside of publishing, they're already thinking 18, 19. That's a young adult to them. And yet in our category, in publishing, we think of that as teen. And so I would even argue, to go even further with Anne's point, I'm like, we should have young adult be split up into teen, 12 up, and young adult, 15 up. And then that would create that new adult space, because that's what everybody outside of publishing already thinks is teen and young adult is that 18, 19, 20-year-old. And Kelly, you're going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I've been involved peripherally with 2 indie bookstores that have opened in the last 6 months, and have learned that indie bookstores, the most successful square footage of indie bookstores is 1,500 to 1,800 square foot, and that includes storage and checkout and all of that. These are not big stores. There's not a lot of shelf space. So I've never seen an indie bookstore that I've been involved with, but that's only like 4 or 5, that has an actual new adult section. Maybe if you go to a huge one, they would, but most indie bookstores do not have. They have a young adult section, but the books that would be new adult, like Fourth Wing, the books you just mentioned, are all shelved with adult fantasy.
And I think the problem with that, because I mean, there is an argument to be made that these books may already exist in the adult space and stuff. And I know several of my own clients have made that argument for why people, when they're asking for like 20-year-old protagonist, spicy settings, people are like, that's adult and it exists. I think there's an element of like, we haven't necessarily taught readers when they're going from picture books to chapter books to middle grade to YA, where to find those books that they naturally gravitate for. They love the immediacy of YA, but they do want those settings. So like Gideon the Ninth is the perfect example for me of an adult book that, like, unless a word of mouth had happened, I would have never picked up Gideon the Ninth. But Gideon the Ninth falls perfectly as like the next step behind a fantasy in the YA space. It's like the next book, but I think you're right. They're going to get shelved in adult, and then it really relies on that word of mouth teaching you how to do the new adult stuff. Yeah. Which then begs the question, like, what are adult themes? How does new adult differentiate itself from adult? And Anne and Lane, you two are our adult agents. Tell us the secrets of the adult world.
Well, I think adult is, I don't want to say found your place in the world, but I mean, I think in an adult, it's not your first job, your first, finding yourself. It's, hey, there's a werewolf out to eat me. I need to get away. Or, I'm going to gang up with my girls and murder a bunch of bad guys. In the case of Anne. I think new
This
adult.
Girl's a Killer is coming out this September, and everyone should absolutely pre-order it. I agree with that statement there.
I agree.
So yeah, it's adults doing and dealing with adult themes, right? So jobs, coworkers, first, second romances, third romances, divorces, all of the things that comes with, the wonderful things of being an adult.
You mean the shitty things of being an adult?
The Wonderful World of
Downsize.
Adulting. Oh my god, I really now want a book that says The Wonderful World of Adulting. Yeah, I mean that is, I think, also very central to this whole conversation as well. Is that, like, at least when I was talking to somebody, I said, your character growth after Kidlit, like, we expect Kidlit to show a certain degree of character growth, because that's the idea, is that kids are growing, they're learning, they're changing and stuff. And then I'm like, I think New Adult might have a little bit of that, but who they are as people is kind of starting to get baked in. And then I guess with Adult, it's set in. It's like the bread is done. Like, we might be carving it up, but the bread is done and stuff. So
Yeah, I think of New Adult as, you're young, you're cool, you party all the time, high school, woo, college, frat parties. Adult is like, you're overweight, you have a pot belly, and some guy's honking at you to get the hell out of line.
Get off my lawn.
Yeah,
Get off
exactly.
my lawn.
And honestly, when I was making up this New Adult thematic thing, I was actually talking to our intern, Chelsea, and I was like, I think it's figuring out who you are outside of that school setting. Like, we've all seen tweets that are like, how do adults make friends? Like, when you're not friends of convenience because you're in class together or you live across the hall. Like, I lived in an all-girls dorm where everybody just left their door open and you could call from your bunk bed across the hall to be like, hey, are you going to dinner? Yeah, I'm going to dinner. Will you come let me in? Things like that. I was the room right next to the door, and people would knock on my window to be like, hey, can you let us into the door here? Because it didn't have a key card. And my intern, Chelsea, was very astute in saying, not all kids go to college. So it's figuring out who they are now that they have a degree of independence, when they don't necessarily have to have a curfew, or, they got their first apartment, and how they're trying to figure out how to budget and how to make ends meet. Like, oh, wait, I work at Whataburger and I get $15 an hour. And, how do I make sure that I don't blow all that kind of thing, like that. And then also Chelsea pointed out challenging childhood beliefs. Like, we kind of do that in YA, but I think in New Adult, you really do it. I went to Hendrix College, shout out Hendrix College. And one of the things they told us the first week was, don't do things you would have done in high school just because it's comfortable. Like, try new sports teams, try new things. So that's where I think New Adult, I would say, would also differ from Adult, is it's very much the newness of these things.
Okay, I have something to add. Remember that show that was based on a book called Sweet Bitter?
No, but I'm going to Google.
I think it was a New Adult. Yeah, Sweet Bitter. And I think of it as the perfect New Adult. I don't know New Adult. I don't read New Adult. I don't know anything. But what I got was, it was her first time in New York, living in New York, and it was her first new job. And there were, from the commercials, a lot of spicy, sexy time with people at the work job.
The official premise, as outlined by USA Today in 2017, is Sweet Bitter follows Tess, who shortly after arriving in New York City lands a job at a celebrated downtown restaurant. Swiftly introduced to the world of drugs, drinking, love, lust, dive bars, and fine dining, she learns to navigate the chaotically alluring yet punishing life she has stumbled upon. Yes, I agree with you. This is 100% what I think New Adult would be. Ooh, this begs the question, then, what other media have we engaged with that we were like, this would symbolize New Adult to us?
Well, I think a lot of the stuff out there, and from talking to producers, when you talk to them, say, what are you looking for? And you pitch them some YA stuff, they say, no YA, no YA. Yeah. I'm not doing the kissing booth.
Yes.
And I think they don't see that YA is a category, like you were mentioning. Like, I represent horror that happens to be YA. So it's horror that's in the category of YA. And, there's a lot of films and stuff out there that, if translated into books, would be YA. Like,
yeah, well, so there's this theory that I have with some of my clients, and y'all, is that essentially, like, if you're doing middle grade or a graphic novel, like, some of the Disney shows that are Y7 would actually read into middle grade for us, right? Pretty Little Liars and Dawson's Creek and Glee and all that. That is very clearly YA. But then you have projects like Euphoria, Yellow Jackets, Sweet Bitter here, the Good Friends. Is it Good Friends? I don't know. I need to check that one. Those are very clearly in that new adult space, but because like even as you said in producing world, they don't recognize that that's a new adult space. They see YA like Kissing Booth, those kind of projects, but they want these heavier 20-something projects that use that YA motif. Like if Twilight happened when Bella was 20, they would have taken it and made it True Blood. Also, I think it's interesting that St. Martin's Press is the one that coined the new adult phrase in 2009.
Did they?
And now they're the ones who have a new adult imprint.
Okay. So what media other than Sweet Bitter would we say is new adult?
I would say
Sex Lives of College Girls.
Yep. 100%. Red, White, and Royal Blue is definitely new adult.
Interesting, because that was a book first.
Yes, and I think that was out of St. Martin's Press, which is why I think it's definitely a new adult book.
Oh, they started. Is that the new Saturday imprint?
Yep. I would say like Freeform also had a lot of very good new adult content. If you all remember Freeform, former ABC Family.
Yes, it's still in existence.
Oh, well, that shows you I haven't watched real TV in forever.
So my question stands though: can you have new adult like horror or new adult thriller, or is it new adult all have to have that spicy, sexy time romance?
I don't think it needs to have spicy, sexy time romance. Now, new adult horror, you're the horror person, so I'm going to pitch a random horror idea, and Anne and Kelly, y'all can also weigh in on this. What if it's like a kid goes to college, has a funky roommate that they are like, this person's kind of weird, not normal. And then it's like Jennifer's Body-esque element where the like roommate is trying to slowly morph into the kid.
Like take over the protagonist's body.
Right, yeah, like take over the body or like take over their life.
Like a Talented Mr. Ripley type of thing? Or
yes, thank you. This is why I love talking with other people who know adult work, because it's like, like a Talented Mr. Ripley type situation in a college dorm room.
So if new adult were the hot thing and people were looking for new adult horror, I would absolutely pitch that as new adult horror.
But when you ask, you're like, does it need sexy times? Does that story need a sexy time?
No.
But do you think that feels like a new adult book compared to like a normal adult book?
Yeah, I mean, I think because people in the industry so immediately think of new adult as like Sweet Bitter and the romance and sexy time, just like in YA, they expect the romance of two, YA kids.
But I think that comes less from like Sweet Bitter is an adult book that they actually pitched in as adult. I'm about to go to Amazon and check this stuff. I think it is that, like you said, most people are thinking, and that's why I think new adult died the first time. It was the sexy times, because then it became aligned more with romance, which gets into the whole misogynistic element of that, of like how we cancel a whole category because it aligned more with romance. But I mean, Sweet Bitter was pitched in as a full adult book, and I'm in the audio version of this because
was it really? Because when it came out, I remember reading in it saying it was a new adult book. Of course, this was years ago, and we all know how my memory is. But I remember thinking new adult, first job, first loves.
The metadata, it's in coming of age fiction and contemporary women's fiction and literary fiction for Sweet Bitter, but it is actually sold in as an adult book.
Are you looking at Amazon categories though?
Yeah, I'm looking at the Amazon categories because I use Amazon as the easiest way to do this.
Right. I think that sometimes a lot of authors will also do that, right? And so they go to Amazon categories without the understanding that Amazon has virtual shelves. And so they can have a shelf for anything and it doesn't matter, right? Like, so they can
Yeah.
literally create a shelf tomorrow that's like mermaids uh, 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 in swimming pool, in high school swimming pools.
Well, and I think
Mermaids in
that goes back
space.
to your. I was gonna say that goes back to your very astute point, and about like how, new adult has done and has excelled, and it's partly, I think you said, through those online indie spaces, and everything. But like when you go into like a Barnes and Noble, where are you gonna find Sweet Bitter? Where are you going to find, the Talented Mr. Ripley, but in a dorm room? Like, where does it sit on the physical shelf when you're in there? Like, and stuff like that.
That's why I think
I
a
feel
lot
like
of things do well in the indie space, right? Because the self-published space, the indie space is the term that we're using here. Because there are, in Amazon, there are gazillions of virtual shelves. So you can very niche down into like exactly what it is that you're targeting. But physical bookstores, they have bricks. They don't have the ability to be like, oh yes, we're just going to build this whole new section right now and have all of these things.
I wonder if we could talk to a Barnes and Noble seller, because we know a bunch of them, and see what they think. Because Anne has said it a couple times, and I think she's absolutely right, that publishers' customers are the bookstores, not readers.
I think we should definitely bring in Mike Lasagna, who is
I love lasagna.
I love him. Really well-known hype man in YA, and talk about that, because I think you're right. There is a demand from customers for this, but then it's that element of like how the chicken or egg. The publishing cycle is an ecosystem, and it's like, how do you convince publishers to do this when they're like, oh, but the bookstores need to do it, and the bookstores are like, we won't do it until the publisher does it. So then it's like this constant loop back and forth. Back to Sweet Bitter, it was published by Knopf Doubleday. So I'm like, that's a very adult publishing. And that, to go to Anne's point, sorry, I hop around. I think that's also a very valid concern for when we are selling these new adult projects now. What if you take it out and the adult people are like, this is YA. This is a YA story. You're telling this story, it's YA. And then the YA people are like, this is not YA, this is adult. We can't set this debut author's first book in, third year of college. That's not, or we can't have them like, this is not a YA. So like, then you get that stuck of like, okay, there's no clear category. Adult people say this is too kidlit. Kidlit people say this is too adult. Where does it sit?
Okay.
That's the rub.
Dims is the rub. Although we know that if somebody does it well and does it right, and it explodes out the gate like the new Hunger Games, Twilight, ACOTAR, everybody after there will be doing it.
Well, I mean, I think that we have seen quite a few new adult books do very well. I mean, we talked about Sarah J. Maas. Like, she's done very well, but they sit in both spaces sometimes, and not necessarily appropriately in both spaces, depending on which of the stories, I guess it is.
And we're talking about Sarah J. Maas's ACOTAR, like it published recently. That's at least 10 years old. And when it first came out, it was in YA. Like they shelved it in YA. And so like there's also this element of like Fourth Wing they shelve in fantasy and stuff. There is this element of the best example of new adult. It's over 10 years old at this point. So it's like, what does this new version of it look like? And I think, to Lane's point, there is also this concern of like, are we going to end up back where we were in 2009, when it was sexy times, spicy times constantly? And it's like, you can have these stories without that spiciness.
So I'm curious to know what you guys think the role of book talkers has in all of this. I'm thinking, Natasha, you and I have talked a lot about Divine Rivals and how that is shelved and it's read as a YA, but based on the parameters we're giving, it really is more of a new adult book based on, the characters are first job, first love. They're out on their own. They don't have parent, family parachutes under them. But that's definitely shelved YA. And from what I don't know, I've read the book, but I don't know much about kind of its story, the story of the book. But from what I understand, it was a book talk book, right?
Yeah, and I would say the role with book talk is, and it goes kind of back to that why we're seeing that demand for upper YA happen and that push for it. It's because these readers grew up in what I've heard as the golden boom of YA, when Twilight, Maze Runner, Divergent, all of those books published. And those readers love the immediacy, they love the action, they love all of the things that are in YA. But they're now in their 20s, in their 30s, and they're saying, we want stories that go a little bit before that. Like in the golden boom of YA, your sexy scene was fade to black. Like it was fade to black. And now it's like, oh, we can get a little bit more on the page and stuff like that. And I think those readers who didn't leave to go into adult are coming back saying, we want all these things we loved in YA, but we want them in adult stories. Like I was talking to somebody and she was like, if you don't have, like, for Poppy Wars, all ACOTAR, Divine Rivals, if you don't have that immediacy, she's like, yeah, it's just boring white male fantasy. And I'm like, that's not true either. But it's that perception of like, oh, that's a dusty part of the category. And that's where I think it goes to Anne's point of where they get shelved, how do they get discovered? And I think Book Talk has done that, and it mixes that discoverability of saying, like, here's the books you want to read. You just finished reading ACOTAR, you're going to read Fourth Wing. And if you just finished reading Fourth Wing, you're going to read Assistant to the Villain. And if you finished reading Assistant to the Villain, you're going to read this Serpent in the Night book. And it's like they do that word of mouth, but it also then crosses into what I think is that issue I talked about earlier with the young adult teen, like the way other people outside of publishing see it. And so they're hearing young adult and they're thinking 18, 19, 20. And we hear young adult thinking 15, 16, 17. And I think that's where Book Talk is getting itself in. Because they're also the ones who are like pushing Colleen Hoover. And then if you look at Walmart's YA section, Colleen Hoover is all over that. And it's like, no.
I was going to mention Colleen Hoover because is Colleen Hoover new adult? I always assumed so. But then I read a synopsis of it and it's all about abuse and rape. And I was like, what the?
I would argue Colleen Hoover is very firmly adult.
I think so.
Yeah, I would argue she's very firmly adult. But the kids, the teens now, because of Book Talk and all that, they're more comfortable leaving the YA space. So you might have a 16-year-old who wants to read Colleen Hoover. That doesn't make Colleen Hoover a new adult, she's adult. She's very firmly adult. I think your new adult stories they're harder to find because they haven't really been in this defined set. They are an emerging category, but I think it's when you see them, you know intrinsically what that book is about. Like Gideon the Ninth to me is a good new adult book.
The Devil Wears Prada. That would be new adult.
Yeah, I would think so.
Jobs, yeah.
Yeah, first job, dealing with the workplace and everything, your potential to lose yourself in the workplace. Yeah, that's new adult. I would put that in.
What about Emily in Paris?
I think so.
I think so, yeah.
I think it's more the tone and the attitude in that one. I mean, it is her first job, but she's in it for 4 years in the show or whatever. But
yeah,
it's the...
Yeah, I think it's the tone. But like The Good Place, which has a very light and happy tone, The Good Place would very clearly be adult.
Adult.
Yeah. So... This is where I like want to have a chart and be like, move it. Which category does it go into? Like, let's do a March Madness for new adult or YA. But yeah, no, I think like Colleen Hoover is adult. If I pull up my Kindle list, I'm sure I could be like that. Like Poison Study by Maria V. Schneider, it's adult. Like it could theoretically push into new adult, but I think that one sits right at the edge of just regular adult and like late end new adult. So Spite House, Lane, is the Spite House new adult?
No, it's absolutely adult.
There you go. See?
I get this question sometimes, or I used to, that, my protagonists are 15 or 16, so it's YA.
No.
And
Not always.
yeah, and that's what my sentiment was. But I've had editors and people say, no, 15-16 makes them YA, or this age makes it new adult.
The best example I can give you is The Lovely Bones. The book The Lovely Bones is told through the perspective of a teen, but that is not a YA book. That is an adult book. And I think that's where we go back to those thematic things of like, what is this main character undergoing? And if that character is undergoing a young adult theme and transformation, it's young adult. If it's like, oh, I'm a 16, like if I'm a 16-year-old narrating this, it doesn't matter. It could be adult. I think it goes back to what is the character's arc and journey and what themes are they hitting.
I think To Kill a Mockingbird's another good example of that. I mean, Scout's what, 8, 9 in the story, and
I thought Scout was 12, or was it?
She
the
grows.
brother?
She grows.
I mean, also Stephen King.
Right.
Anne's favorite book.
Yep. I think that is a hallmarker, and keep in mind the young adult kidlit category in and of itself is still relatively new. Like if you look at the YA books of the 80s, it was like Sweet Valley High and like things like that. And even before that, kidlit books were mostly used as like teaching tools to tell children how to behave. So this whole idea of like reading for pleasure, reading for enjoyment for children is probably it's like probably like 50-60 years. I don't know how to math, people, but it's a relatively new concept, which means that it's not surprising that we have examples of adult books using child narrators. Like that doesn't necessarily mean it's YA or kidlit. It really comes down to what is this journey? What is this kid's journey and stuff like that.
Also, like you said, the themes. What are the themes of the story? What are all of those other things that are going on as well?
Exactly. Like one of my favorite, I would call a new adult book is Sadie by Courtney Summers. I freaking love that book. Half of that book is narrated by Sadie, and half of that book is narrated by an adult podcaster. And it sits perfectly in that new adult space. And I love it. Side note, the audiobook is amazing. Listen to the audiobook.
So, me being me, my next question is, can a YA book have also the point of view of adults?
I would say no with an asterisk. And because I just said Courtney Summers Sadie book. I think the reason that the Courtney Summers Sadie book works with the adult podcaster POV is because it's looking at a year later after Sadie's point of view. So it's like we're investigating what happened to Sadie, and Sadie then is telling you what's happening to her at the same time. So like nothing good's gonna happen. I would say it's weird. It's weird to have an adult perspective in a YA book. It's kind of a little icky.
Right.
Yeah.
But I just think that's one of those rules, though, that can be broken when the book is done really, really well. And if the story absolutely demands it. I'm also thinking down into middle grade. You've got Wonder, which did beautifully. Doesn't that have adult perspectives? It has like 6 or 7 different perspectives. And I believe one of them is from the parent. I know older siblings, definitely teens. Augie is like, he's definitely in middle school. So I think
it's really hard too when we talk about some of these books, like wonder how many years ago was that published? Like that's and also we're talking about
so they breaks the mold.
Yeah, we're talking about exceptions to the rule.
Exactly.
Courtney Summers is a multi-award winning, like best-selling author. She can do whatever the hell she wants, and I will literally read her grocery list if she allows me to. It's amazing. So
I think, Anne, you've got a great point going about like just once you know your category so well, you know the rules of the game. To quote the Lady Spice Girls, got to know the rules if you want to play the game. Once you know them, then you can break them. Right. Then you know how to break them, and you know in which way, which is why I think I'm going to say something controversial here, y'all. I think the new adult category is not going to be defined by debut authors. I think it's going to be best defined by established writers who know whatever category they came out of and are going to write into this new category because they know how to break their own category in such a way to mesh with this. It's like a puzzle piece.
I think you
That's
and I
a really
talked
good
about
point.
this, Natasha. 'Cause that's exactly what I said. I think that it's going to take established authors to help build the readership behind the category to show that it is selling. And so that way it's going to help say, oh, look, bookstore, here is why this is valuable and how creating this shelf space is going to be beneficial to you.
Yeah. Which, to beg a question, who's a YA author we think would really do that very well? Or even an adult author we think could go down really well.
I'd say Adam Cesare for, I don't know if I'm saying his last name right, for horror, because he does Clown in a Cornfield, which is pitched as YA, but I think the first one had adult perspectives. Are you frozen, Anne, or are you just...
We're all thinking.
We're all thinking.
I thought Anne was frozen because everyone was like...
I'm in the wrong room for this conversation
Just
because I'm in my
staring.
Kidlit room, but I'm like, I need to get near my novels to be able to be like, novels.
Staring.
I know Laura Taylor Namey can do it. I think Laura could handle it very well. I would absolutely slam my money on the counter and be like, I am here for it. If Sabaa Tahir announced that they were doing a like fantasy adult, I'd be like, I'm here for it. Like, just take my money now. And I'm always here for Sarah J. Maas. Like, I made y'all read her just so I can like have deep conversations. What about you, Anne and Kelly?
I'm my brain is blank. Now my client Dana writes YA, and we are going out with a new adult of hers in another couple of weeks. So fingers crossed, she can do it.
Yeah.
Question: does it have sexy, spicy times?
It does.
I'm telling
but
you,
not to the level of
some of them.
Some of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that
Not
also
to quite that detail. Not the 12 pages long.
I'm gonna give y'all an idea for another podcast. Is spicy being used in place of intimacy? Are we overusing spiciness instead of looking at intimacy within things? Because that's the other thing I'm seeing is like, oh, we need graphic sex scenes, but it's like there's no emotional intimacy here. You guys haven't talked about the real issue. So yeah, you boinked several times in this chapter, but nobody interrogated the issues at the heart of your relationship. And I think honestly, that's really, at least for me, what I need more in new adult and YA is that character, emotional resonance. Like some of the best sexy time scenes I know don't even involve sex. It's like him brushing her hair when she finally lets her hair down, and them just looking at each other in the mirror, and it's like, whoo, that's so sweet. Like, whoo. I'm getting blushed up just thinking about it, but like no sexy times were had there. Just brushing of hair.
Okay. Final thoughts, Natasha.
I feel like I talked this whole time, but honestly, I think this is
you're our special guest. It's fine.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting category to keep an eye on. It could completely fizzle out. It could be something we're all trying to make happen because of readership. It could be that it ends up being nothing but sexy times, and it happened in 2019 when it just died and went to self-published. But I think it's an interesting thing that we have the ability to be tastemakers in this moment, and that's partly why I love being an agent.
Kelly?
I think.
Oh, no, Anne, you go, Anne.
I think that, all of that is right. Yeah. But I think that it's going to take the buy-in from the stores in order to make this actually work. And I mean the physical brick and mortar stores.
Yeah.
It's one thing to have a virtual shelf. It's another thing to have a physical shelf space. And so we need to have those physical shelf spaces so the publisher can sell the product to their customer efficiently. Yeah. So,
side note to add on to that, like the virtual shelf, the Barnes and Noble table placement,
Mhm.
where they can pull from that. Is that the equivalent of a virtual shelf for Barnes and Noble, where it's like it still sells into their normal shelves, but now it's like, ooh, a new adult table. All the books that are new adult. Who
I
knows?
mean, maybe the publisher can talk to them about making that happen. I don't know, but there needs to be a conversation that takes place to have a physical space in the store. There has to be a buy-in from the bookstores in order to make it
Mhm.
worth their while to purchase these books.
Yes. And honestly, we need to change the lingo.
Mhm.
I think that's also adding to the confusion all
I
of this.
agree.
I'm not a new adult. I'm a young adult. I was not a young adult. I was a teen. Like,
I agree. But
yeah, I think
Or maybe not necessarily changing the language, but just educating.
it's easier to change publishing than it is to educate the rest of the world.
I mean, that might be true. That might be true.
Because, like, I knew side note, there is an interesting conversation. We really need to go to England for this, but some of the young adult books that exist now are actually sold in as adult books in England. So then
Right.
that also begs the question, like,
Road trip,
Tobias road trip to England.
agency road trip. I mean, I think it might.
I mean, it'd be a boat trip or
it would be
a plane trip.
necessary. Yeah.
Yeah, but that might be what we need to do. The Tobias literally lens on the road. Let's investigate how our books are shelved internationally, because that might also be the issue, is that the American market just doesn't follow the norm.
It would be a tax write-off. Just gonna throw it out there.
We can meet
It's
editors
true.
and go to the book festival.
We could.
Yeah. I think it's easier to get Lane to go to the zombie subway than it is to get him to go to London.
I went to Italy.
That's true. So,
Yeah.
all this to say, fun things. Kelly, did you have final thoughts?
Didn't you guys covered a lot of? You spoke well.
I feel like Anne and I have just been bashing this idea around forever.
Whatever title you put on it, it's a demographic of readers, and the
Mhm.
publishers are just wanting to get things to the stores who want to sell it to a certain demographic of readers. So it's and right now they're trying to copy certain things that are selling well, and that's what's
Well, and maybe by giving them this
drives it.
category, we get our young YA back. Our books like Geek Girl and Princess Diaries, which
Mhm.
are shoving into middle grade, which is a whole other conversation
Right.
about like how
Right.
that's impacting middle grade readers. Wide ranging conversation today, Lane.
Anne, why don't you take us out?
All right. Well, that is another episode with us here with Lane Haymont and Kelly Dyksterhouse, me, Ann Rose, and our special guest, Natasha Morris, for the Literary Lens. So make sure you like, subscribe, and leave us a comment. What are your thoughts about new adult and what we talked about today? We'd love to hear from you, and we can't wait to see you again next time.